Did you ever have to pretend everything was fine when it really wasn't?
You know, it's funny how a single text message, not even a long one, just 10 words, can peel open your chest and poke right at a wound you've been pretending didn't exist for years. Don't ruin the holiday with your vibes, my brother Ryan texted me, with that same smug confidence he's always carried, the kind that comes when you've spent your whole life getting away with everything. And I mean everything. I stared at those words on my phone, blinking in the parking lot of a grocery store, with my cart half full of Thanksgiving food I wasn't even sure I wanted to cook anymore. It wasn't even the message itself that cut me, it was what it meant, what it always meant. That I was the problem. That I was the one who couldn't let things go. That the mess he made should just be politely ignored so we could all enjoy dry turkey and forced smiles like every other year. That was the moment I decided something. Not out loud, not in the heat of rage. No, it was cold. Quiet. I looked at his message, then at my reflection in the driver's side mirror, and I made a promise to myself I wasn't going to ruin the holiday with my vibes. I was going to destroy his with mine. And not with drama, not with screaming, not by flipping the table like Mom always feared I might. I was going to unravel Ryan's perfect little life one invisible thread at a time, right under his nose, and watch it all come crashing down before dessert. And if the rest of the family wanted to keep pretending he was still the golden boy after that, then maybe they deserved to burn in the same fire. You might be wondering what kind of sister thinks like that, what kind of person stews in resentment long enough to plan emotional arson over Thanksgiving. But before you judge me, let me tell you who Ryan is. He's the kid who shoved me down the stairs when I was 8 and told our mom I tripped. She believed him. He's the teenager who wrecked Dad's car in high school and let me take the fall because I had a detention that same day and couldn't prove otherwise. He's the adult who stood next to my ex-husband at our divorce hearing, smirking like it was a football game, like he had won something. Ryan has spent his entire life smiling in the front row while I got humiliated on stage. And every single time I tried to defend myself, every time I raised my voice, every time I cried, Mom would tilt her head and say, "Jessica, don't be so dramatic." Ryan didn't mean anything by it. He always meant it. Every single time. That Thanksgiving, we were all meeting at Mom's house, our childhood home in Indiana, 2 stories of passive-aggressive beige and furniture that never quite matched. Emily, Ryan's wife, was flying in from a work conference a day late. Ryan was bringing the kids and his famous pumpkin pie, which he bought at the store and passed off as homemade. My daughter Claire and I were driving down together, a quiet tower drive that used to feel longer when she was younger and more talkative. Now she just had headphones in, scrolling through whatever social media platform she was obsessed with that month, only occasionally glancing up when I cursed at traffic or slammed the brakes. She was 15 now, sharp, observant, more like me than I sometimes liked to admit. She knew the family dynamics even if we never said them out loud. And when I told her about Ryan's text, she didn't even flinch. She just said, "So what are you going to do?" Not "are you going to do something?" Just what? The truth is, I didn't have a clear plan yet. Not then. But I knew the first move. Ryan had built his entire adult identity around the idea that he was stable, responsible, respectable. He wore blazers to casual dinners. He used phrases like "circle back" in family conversations. He called himself a partner in his real estate firm, though nobody was ever quite sure what that meant. He made Emily carry his business cards in her purse in case she met someone important. But underneath that curated exterior, there were cracks, hairline fractures I'd been watching for years. The flirting with coworkers he thought no one noticed. The sketchy Venmo payments with emojis that didn't match the transactions. The way his voice went an octave higher when Emily asked him about weekend plans. And I'd kept it all to myself, locked in the mental filing cabinet I'd built since childhood, where all the shit I wasn't allowed to say went to rot. But now? Now I had nothing to lose. I started small. The morning before Thanksgiving, I texted our cousin Amy loud, nosy, allergic to discretion, and casually mentioned that Ryan had been seen with a client at a hotel bar in Chicago last month. I phrased it carefully, just enough truth to be credible, just enough vagueness to spark suspicion. Could have been a work thing, though. You know Ryan. She replied with 6 question marks and a what, followed by, tell me everything. I didn't. I didn't need to. Amy would do the rest. Gossip was her cardio. Then I updated my Find My Phone settings to leave a location ping active on my charger. Slipped it into my bag. I'd accidentally leave it at Mom's house, just tucked under the guest bed, and wait. Ryan's kids were curious. His oldest was 12 and already asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Kids are smarter than we think. And phones are treasure maps. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, just like every year. The driveway was full of familiar cars, including Ryan's shiny new SUV leased, not bought, though he lied about that. I wore my best poker face, carried in a homemade pecan pie that Claire actually helped bake, and walked into that house like nothing was different. But everything was. Because this year, I didn't come to be polite. I didn't come to keep the peace. I came to start the war. And the best part? Ryan didn't even know the first grenade had already gone off. By the time we sat down at the table, the tension was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Ryan smiled across the table like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't gotten his message, like he was still in control. But I just smiled back, poured myself a generous glass of wine, and said, so Ryan, still working with that assistant of yours? What was her name again? Melissa? Or was it Madison? The pause he took before answering was less than a second. But I saw it. And I knew. This was going to be fun. If you've ever sat at a table with people who've spent decades perfecting the art of pretending everything's fine when it absolutely isn't, you'll understand the kind of stomach-turning tension I'm talking about. Where the clink of a fork on a plate is louder than a scream, where every smile looks just a little too stretched, and where behind every comment about stuffing or cranberry sauce, there's a buried mine waiting to go off. That's exactly how Thanksgiving Day felt in my mother's house, as the scent of overcooked turkey hung heavy in the air and Ryan strolled in like he hadn't sent that text 3 days earlier, like he wasn't balancing 1,000 lies in his head, like I wasn't quietly pulling the string that held it all together. From the moment he stepped through the door, grinning like a politician at a fundraiser, with his kids trailing behind him and his fake pie boxed up in one of those smug little brown bakery containers, I could tell he didn't suspect a thing. He didn't know Amy had already texted me asking if I had more tea, didn't know his daughter had found the work trip receipts in his glove box while looking for gum, didn't know Emily's friend Monica had messaged me on Facebook, completely unprompted, to ask if everything was okay between them, which in suburban woman code means she knows something's up and wants to pretend she doesn't. Ryan was still performing for his imaginary audience, still playing the Golden Sun role like it was a sitcom script he'd memorized years ago and couldn't stop reciting even when the cameras stopped rolling. The worst part was how effortlessly everyone went along with it, Mom fluttering around the kitchen like a frazzled sitcom mom from the 90s, bustling with fake urgency, talking too loudly, overcompensating for the lack of genuine warmth in the room with sugar-coated small talk that made my teeth ache. She asked me again, for the 5th time that morning, if I was doing okay, which was her way of saying try not to embarrass us this year, and smiled so tightly I thought her jaw might crack. Claire, my daughter, sat next to me at the dining table, her phone resting face down for once. Her expression carefully neutral in the way that only teenagers can pull off when they're observing everything and trying to pretend they're not judging every adult in the room. She knew, of course. Not everything, but enough to know that I wasn't just here to eat mashed potatoes and nod politely through another holiday charade. I waited until the second glass of wine and the first awkward silence before I struck, not obviously, not explosively, just a light tap with the edge of the hammer to see what would give. Ryan had just finished telling a long-winded, clearly rehearsed story about a difficult client who ended up buying 2 condos instead of one, complete fiction, if you knew the real estate market in his area and the kind of people who bought there. When I leaned forward and said, in that casual, light tone that only sounds casual if you've spent your whole life swallowing rage, was that before or after that Vegas trip you took in July? The one where your phone was dead for 48 hours. There was a pause, slight but unmistakable, like someone had pulled the record needle off the soundtrack of our family's performance. Emily glanced at him, too quickly, then just as quickly looked down at her plate, stabbing her green beans with a little too much force. Ryan, always quick on the recovery, laughed a little too loud, a little too long, and said something about bad reception, hotel Wi-Fi. Can you believe how expensive everything is in Vegas? But his voice cracked just enough to make me grin into my wineglass. What I didn't expect, what I hadn't planned, was the way his daughter looked at him. 12 years old, precocious, already smarter than her father in every way that mattered. She tilted her head slightly, that same gesture Claire used to make when she was little and didn't understand why adults were pretending not to be angry when they clearly were. She didn't say anything, but her eyes never left his face for the rest of dinner, and that look, sharp, questioning, quietly devastating, was better than any speech I could have delivered. The rest of the meal unfolded like every Thanksgiving ever had in our family: surface pleasantries, overcooked stuffing, Mom's insistence that she didn't need help cleaning up, and the slow, creeping dread that settled in your bones as dessert approached and everyone ran out of things to lie about. But this time, I wasn't the one fidgeting under the table or mentally counting the hours until I could go home and cry in the shower. This time, it was Ryan who kept checking his phone when he thought no one was looking, whose smile got tighter with every passing minute, whose wife kept getting up to check on the kids every 10 minutes, like she needed a breather from pretending. After dessert, while Mom fussed with dishes and everyone else migrated to the living room for coffee and couch naps, I made my quiet exit. I didn't announce it, didn't say goodbye, just gathered Claire and my coat and left my charger, my old, beat-up, easily overlooked phone charger, tucked beneath the guest bed in the room Ryan's youngest was staying in. Not a big move. Not even a risky one. Just a breadcrumb. A little piece of bait for someone curious enough to follow. In the car, Claire didn't ask why we left early. She just looked out the window, then turned to me and said, "That was weird." I asked what she meant, and she shrugged the way she always does when she's trying not to give away how much she understands. Uncle Ryan kept lying. Like, badly. It was almost sad. Then she put her headphones back in and stared out into the dark highway, leaving me alone with that thought. It was almost sad. Almost. But not quite. Because sadness is reserved for people who didn't have a choice, people who didn't build their own downfall out of arrogance and cruelty and the assumption that no one was ever going to hold them accountable. Ryan wasn't sad. He was just finally uncomfortable. And that, for the first time in years, was enough to make me feel something close to peace. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. There's a strange sort of calm that settles over you once you realize you don't owe anyone in your family the benefit of the doubt anymore. Once you stop trying to earn your seat at the table or prove that your instincts were valid all along, and you just start moving through the wreckage with the quiet clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose. By the time Sunday rolled around, 2 days after the Thanksgiving performance, the house had already begun to feel like a pressure cooker: tight smiles, clipped tones, the kind of forced cheerfulness that starts to sound like a threat if you listen long enough. And while everyone else was still pretending the holiday had gone off without a hitch, I was already laying the groundwork for Ryan's image to crack open in front of the very people who once called him perfect. The beauty of real revenge, the kind that doesn't explode but rather seeps in like slow-moving rot, is that it doesn't require theatrics or outbursts. It only requires patience, attention to detail, and the willingness to wait while the truth does all the work for you. I didn't need to invent lies about Ryan. I didn't need to exaggerate or embellish. All I had to do was release the pieces of truth he worked so hard to bury and place them where the right eyes would see them. And this time, the right eyes were Emily's, his wife, his partner in public perfection, the woman who posted about gratitude and family first while looking more exhausted every time I saw her. I didn't text her directly, didn't reach out like some homewrecker waving red flags. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I slid a message to Monica, Emily's childhood best friend and occasional truth barometer, who had already asked me, a week before Thanksgiving, if I thought everything was okay with them. That vague little question had been bouncing around my head since I received it, and now it became the perfect opening. So I replied, carefully, deliberately, with a single sentence, I don't know, Monica, but if you ever saw the way he talks to Madison at work, I think you'd have some of the same questions I do. No follow-up. No accusations. Just a breadcrumb. It took less than 2 hours for Monica to reply, this time, with concern cloaked in performative neutrality. I probably shouldn't ask, but do you have any idea how long that's been going on? Again, I gave her just enough to chew on. Long enough that his calendar doesn't match up with his receipts. Ask Emily about his weekend conference in Nashville. And just like that, the fire had a spark. I didn't need to fan it. Monica would do that part herself, intentionally or not. By the time we all gathered again on Sunday for one of those traditional leftover brunches where everyone eats pie for breakfast and pretends they're still grateful for each other's company, the atmosphere in the living room had shifted in a way you couldn't quite name, but absolutely could feel. Emily was quieter than usual, more observant, sitting slightly farther from Ryan on the couch and not laughing at his recycled real estate anecdotes, not even pretending to enjoy his jokes about baby boomers not knowing how to use QR codes. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the kind of tension that comes from someone trying to maintain control while their inner alarm bells are screaming. I watched them from across the room, sipping coffee from the mug I'd used every year since college, listening to Mom rattle on about how much the kids had grown and how proud she was of all her babies. Ryan, of course, basked in the praise with that familiar head tilt and modest chuckle, the same one he used when he'd lie to teachers, to police officers, to girlfriends, anyone who ever tried to hold him accountable. He'd built his entire life on the currency of charm, and it had worked because no one ever bothered to look behind the curtain. Until now. Emily waited until we were in the kitchen alone, just the two of us rinsing dishes while the kids played in the backyard and Ryan held court over some story about market trends, before she spoke. Her voice was even, calm, maybe even polite to the untrained ear, but I knew that tone. I'd heard it in my own mouth 1,000 times, the kind of composure you only manage when your heart has already broken, but you're too tired to say so out loud. Did you know he was in Vegas in July? She asked, not looking at me, her hands moving methodically over the plates. I hesitated, just a beat, then said, he told me it was for work. I didn't ask questions. She nodded slowly, placed a rinsed plate in the drying rack, then looked up at me. Funny. I didn't know about it until last night. I didn't offer anything more. I didn't need to. That silence between us did the talking. That afternoon, while Ryan was in the driveway showing Uncle Greg something on his phone, probably another fake property listing or stock photo of a condo he claimed to be closing, I texted a friend of mine who worked in corporate HR at a mid-sized real estate firm across the state. We hadn't talked in a few years, but I still had her number, and I knew she was just the kind of person who paid attention to office gossip the way some people followed sports stats. I didn't ask for a formal favor. I didn't even mention Ryan by name. I just asked if she'd heard of any firms dealing with reputation management issues or quiet HR investigations involving junior employees and their supervisors. She replied with a laugh and said, "Oh girl, I've got stories." I said, "Tell me about any that start with a guy named Ryan whose assistant is suddenly on leave," and I could almost feel her posture shift through the screen. "What's your angle?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Later that night, after everyone had left and Mom was upstairs pretending not to be exhausted, I got a call from an unknown number I didn't answer and a follow-up text from a burner phone. "You're playing a dangerous game." I knew exactly who it was. I smiled. And I waited. Because Ryan still hadn't figured it out, hadn't realized I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused. And for the first time in my life, I was winning. But the most dangerous thing about a golden boy who's starting to tarnish isn't the fall. It's what he'll do on the way down to take everyone else with him. And I was ready for that, too. There's a moment, if you've ever truly pushed someone's carefully constructed life to the edge of collapse, when you realize the line between strategy and cruelty starts to blur, and the clarity you once had, the cold, righteous sense of justice that carried you through each choice, starts to shift into something else entirely, something heavier, something harder to name, because it's no longer just about them and what they've done, but also about what you are becoming in the process. By the middle of the following week, after the Thanksgiving haze had settled and everyone returned to their own private routines and polite silences, that line started to haunt me. Not because I regretted anything I didn't, but because the consequences had become real, louder than I expected, and dangerously close to spilling into places I hadn't meant to touch. It started with a missed call from Emily, followed by a voicemail that didn't ask for anything specific, just a long, shaky breath and the sound of someone trying to decide whether to cry or scream. That alone told me more than words ever could. Then came the message from Monica, short, panicked, but heavy with implication. He knows it's coming from someone close. He's freaking out. Did you say something to anyone at his office? I didn't respond right away. I sat there in my car outside a CVS, the heater blowing stale air across my knees, holding my phone like it was about to detonate. Not because I was afraid, but because, for the first time, I felt the weight of how far this had gone, of what it meant that Ryan's panic was no longer private. It had leaked into his professional world, into the one place he still thought he was untouchable, and now he was lashing out in every direction trying to find the crack in his fortress. But it wasn't a crack. It was a demolition, one brick at a time, and he still hadn't realized the person holding the blueprint was me. The next clue came from Claire. My daughter, blunt in the way that only a teenager raised in the wreckage of adult lies can be, was sitting across from me at dinner the next evening, picking at her pasta and not quite making eye contact. She didn't speak for a while, just twirled her fork like she was winding up for something. Then, quietly, without drama or accusation, she said, "I saw the messages. On your laptop. From Monica. About Uncle Ryan." My heart didn't jump. I didn't panic. I'd always known she was observant, too observant for someone her age, and I had grown so used to hiding things from my family that I'd forgotten I couldn't hide from her. She didn't yell. She didn't even sound angry. She just asked, "Are you trying to ruin him?" The question sat in the air between us like smoke. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have one, but because I didn't know if the truth would feel like a confession. Eventually, I said the only thing I could: "I'm trying to make him accountable. Something no one else has ever done." She nodded, not approving, not disapproving, just accepting, the way someone does when they realize the adults in their life aren't heroes or villains, just broken people doing the best they can with the wreckage they were handed. And somehow, that made it harder. Not because I doubted myself, but because I finally saw how much of this had already spilled over, how far from harmless this had become. Ryan, for his part, was coming undone in real time. I heard through Amy that he'd been pulled into an HR meeting for optics, which is just corporate code for we know something's going on and need to make it look like we're handling it. Emily, apparently, hadn't come home the night before, and the kids were asking questions he didn't have answers to. His oldest had made a cryptic post on her private Instagram account, something about trust and masks falling off, and though it could have been about anything, we all knew who it was aimed at. He was unraveling, and the beauty of it was that no one could trace it back to me directly. I had left no fingerprints. Just whispers, timing, and a well-placed charger still quietly feeding me location data from the guest room at Mom's house. But even in victory, there's always that one thread you don't expect, the one that pulls on you when you're least prepared. For me, it came from Mom, in the form of a handwritten letter. Yes, a real letter. She mailed it, which was strange enough, considering we spoke on the phone at least once a week, even if those calls were mostly shallow updates and strained platitudes. It arrived on a Friday, tucked between a credit card bill and a flyer for roof repairs, and I opened it thinking it was some holiday card she sent early out of guilt. But it wasn't. It was 3 pages long, written in her familiar cursive, the kind she used when she was trying to seem calm but was barely holding it together. She wrote about how she noticed the tension, how she knew something was wrong with Ryan but didn't want to believe it, how she'd spent so many years trying to keep the peace that she wasn't sure who she was protecting anymore. She didn't accuse me. She didn't beg me to stop. But at the end she wrote one line that caught me by the throat: "If you destroy him, you'll be just like him, only smarter." I sat on the couch for a long time after that, the letter in my lap, the silence pressing in from all sides. I didn't feel guilt. Not exactly. But I felt the edge of something creeping in, something that looked a little like doubt and sounded a little like my younger self asking, will they ever believe me if I don't burn it all down? Because that's what this had become. Not a reckoning. Not a moment of justice. A burn. A fire I'd lit because I was tired of waiting for someone else to see the smoke. That night, I got another message, this time in the family group chat, which had been dead quiet for days. Ryan, breaking the silence with all caps fury, wrote, I know what you're doing. You think you're smart. But this isn't over. No context. No hello. Just digital shouting into a void that no one responded to. Not even Mom. Not even Emily. I watched the 3 blinking dots appear for a moment, someone typing, then stopping before they vanished altogether. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Because the thread wasn't just unraveling for Ryan anymore. It was unraveling for all of us. There's something almost poetic about the way silence becomes deafening when someone who's always held the floor, always commanded attention, always been the loudest voice in the room, suddenly realizes that no one's listening anymore, not because they can't hear him, but because they've simply stopped caring enough to respond. That was the sound I heard, though not literally, when Ryan's desperate, furious, all-caps tirade lit up the family group chat like a house fire in the middle of the night. The digital equivalent of a tantrum thrown by a man who had spent his entire life believing that shame only stuck to other people, never to him. The messages arrived one after the other, sharp and chaotic, each one more unhinged than the last, typed with fingers that I imagined were trembling with the rage of someone who had never before been forced to feel the consequences of his own actions. I know what you're doing, he wrote first, the words as loud as they could be without volume, followed by an almost laughable threat, you think you're smart. But this isn't over. Then came the wild flurry, accusations, half-truths, venom masked as victimhood, a flood of defensiveness so theatrical it bordered on pathetic. He blamed me for the tension in his marriage, for the rumors at work, for the weird looks from the kids, even for the stress-induced migraines he claimed he'd developed over the past week. As if I had conjured each of those things out of spite and sorcery, rather than years of repressed truth finally clawing its way to the surface. I stared at my phone, watching the messages pile up, one after another, while the silence from everyone else in the chat grew heavier with every passing second. Not a single reply. Not even a weak attempt at mediation from Mom. Just Ryan, spiraling into the void he'd spent his whole life pretending didn't exist. And then, finally, like a match dropped into a powder keg, I responded. It wasn't long. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even angry, though I could have filled a dozen pages with the fury I'd swallowed since childhood. I typed out one sentence, cold and sharp and hollow. You told me not to ruin the holiday with my vibes. I honored your request. And then I put my phone down, not caring whether he'd reply, not caring if the silence continued, not needing applause or validation or support. Because by then, the truth had already bloomed in the corners of everyone's mind like mold in a damp basement, unavoidable, unpleasant, and far too late to ignore. But the irony of revenge, especially the kind that burns slowly and with precision, is that it never ends cleanly, never ties itself up in a bow, never leaves you feeling like a victor. What you feel instead is this strange, hollow ache, a kind of emotional tinnitus that buzzes behind your thoughts long after the dust has settled, whispering that maybe, just maybe, you became someone else in the process, someone harder, colder, less willing to believe in things like healing or closure or reconciliation. And that feeling hit me hardest the next morning, when Claire, my daughter, my mirror, the one person I thought might actually understand why I did what I did, stood in the kitchen doorway, her face unreadable, and said, "You got what you wanted, right?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, standing there in one of my old sweatshirts, her hair pulled back, her eyes older than 15 should ever look, and I realized that while I had been busy dismantling my brother's illusions, I had also chipped away at something in her. Some part of her trust in me, some belief that adults were supposed to be better than this. I wanted him to stop getting away with it, I said finally, not proud, not victorious, just honest. She nodded slowly, her mouth set in a line that reminded me too much of my own, then walked past me and left the room. No door slammed. No tears. Just distance. And that distance stung worse than any insult Ryan could have hurled at me. Later that week, Emily called. I hadn't expected it, and for a moment I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in me needed to hear her voice, to know how much collateral damage had been done. When I answered, she didn't waste time. No pleasantries. No softening. Just a question, was it you? And, because there was no point in lying, I said yes. There was silence then, long and heavy, before she spoke again, her voice flat, exhausted, but not surprised. I should hate you, she said. But I don't. I'm just tired. So tired of pretending he was someone he never was. I waited, unsure of whether she was about to hang up or unleash something uglier, but instead she simply said, "Thank you for waking me up. But don't contact me again." Click. And just like that, she was gone. Another bridge burned, even if the fire was necessary. I sat with that for a long time, longer than I probably should have, staring out the window at nothing in particular, wondering how many more connections I would lose before the ashes finally cooled. The family group chat, once a chaotic mess of birthday reminders and passive-aggressive recipe tips, remained silent after Ryan's outburst. For days, no one posted. No one responded. No one even shared a photo of their kids or asked about holiday plans. It was as if everyone had collectively agreed to let it die, to let the silence speak for them, to let the absence of words say what no one could bring themselves to write. Eventually, I got a notification that Ryan had left the group. Not in anger. Not in some dramatic exit. Just gone. Quiet. Final. Like a balloon finally drifting out of view. And so there I sat, 1 week after Thanksgiving, alone in my living room with a glass of wine that had gone warm in my hand, watching the cursor blink in an empty message window and wondering, not for the first time, whether any of this had actually changed anything at all. I thought I'd feel better. I thought the truth, once unleashed, would feel like freedom. But instead it just felt like standing in the wreckage of something that might never be rebuilt. You think you want revenge until you get it. And then you realize it doesn't taste like victory. It tastes like nothing. And maybe that's the part no one tells you. Maybe that's the real cost. Because once you cut the wires, once you sever the ties, once you bring the truth out into the open where everyone has to look at it and make their choice, you can't control who stays, who walks away, or who simply pretends they never saw anything at all. You just watch them disappear, one by one, and you sit in the silence you created. And you wonder if silence was what you wanted all along.